Welcome everyone to Sephardic World. If you could mute yourself, we'd be grateful. We'd like to first of all welcome our patrons and say thank you very much for your continued support. I'd like to apologize that as some people know, I have a ongoing medical condition. I apologize that we weren't able to broadcast last week, and I'd also actually like to thank Ton for carrying the load for this meeting. And today we're going to be talking about Sephardim, Portuguese Jews in pre-revolutionary France, and we have for quite some time tried to find an expert, but we haven't yet been able. Neither Ton and I claim to be experts on the subject, but this is the major area that we haven't yet discussed. So we thought it would be useful if we have a conversation now, and obviously we shall return to this in the future. So to begin, we are focusing on the southwest of France, particularly if you look at the image on the left. The blue arrow is pointing towards the city of Bordeaux, which is the most important city in the region, and the red towards Bayonne, which is also a major town. This area had been under English rule, but was lost to the French at the end of the 100 Years' War. And if you look at the bottom of the yellow area, you see the area around Bayonne is bordering the Atlantic Ocean and also Spain to the south. And if we look more closely at that region, on this map, the brown and the sandy colors shows the western end of the Pyrenees Mountains, which divide France from Spain. And you can see at the extreme end near the Atlantic Ocean, the mountains give way, so that is easier to cross the land border. And on this we have shown with the blue arrow the city of Bayonne, and with the red Saint-Jean-de-Luz. And here we have a French postal route map from the year 1632. And if you look at the very bottom, with the green and red lines where the Spanish and French border appears, the very first town you come to is Saint-Jean-de-Luz, and two stops further up you get to Bayonne, and if you look further up at a sort of crossroads, you get to Bordeaux. And what I think this shows is that any news from Spain would first, of course, arrive in this area, and the population of that area would know what was going on in Spain, certainly before the news got to Paris, and indeed any instruction came back from Paris. So possibly there was an advantage in being there. So we are going to, in 2 minutes, just give a very brief overview of the Jews of France. Obviously, this really would require several meetings. The important thing to remember is that whilst we have Portuguese Jews, or certainly New Christians, in the southwest, on the Rhine side of France is, of course, the Ashkenazi heartland. So there were two different Jewish communities, both interacting with the French state. There were multiple expulsions of Jews from France, the most important of which was in 1394. Jews, of course, returned to France various times and were often kicked out. There were a number of anti-Semitic edicts, of which that of 1615 is probably the most significant. And within this, for example, a French person could be punished for even talking to a Jew. But the situation changed slightly at the end of the 30 Years' War, with the peace treaty signed in 1648, which handed Alsace and Lorraine over to France. And these territories had a Jewish population, of course, an Ashkenazi Jewish population. And the French monarchy thought about kicking them out, but obviously they had a commercial advantage to keep them. And even a few years later, in 1675, they were given some protections, which is not to say that the French state was going soft on Jews, because in the Caribbean in 1683, unquestionably Portuguese Jews, I'm not sure where from, maybe from Dutch islands or English islands or elsewhere, tried to establish themselves on the French sugar island of Martinique and got kicked out. The 18th century, the Enlightenment and things generally got a bit better. We've described it as quiet toleration. Towards the end of the century, in 1785, a poll tax, all Jews had to pay a particular tax, was removed. And also they were allowed to settle outside of particular areas. And then, of course, in 1789, we have the French Revolution, which gave rights to the Portuguese, first of all, and the Ashkenazi later. But from that point, we see a change in and a more sort of liberal attitude, of course, especially under Napoleon. That's a generality. If we look at specifics of what were generally called Portuguese merchants, that Portuguese and Spanish settlers, both Old Christian and New Christian, started settling in the region in the early 16th century. As we said before, this was an area that had been English. I'm not sure if it had been somewhat depopulated, but certainly these settlers were welcome. And King Henri II in 1550 published a letters patent that granted the Portuguese New Christians the same rights and privileges as indigenous inhabitants of cities, so places like Bordeaux and Bayonne. The Parliament of Bordeaux, this is the local regional parliament, had to intervene to protect these Portuguese in 1574. I am not an expert. My impression is that this was the aristocracy, or at least the ruling class, moving to protect their clients from local merchants, but I may be mistaken. The Inquisition existed in France, but it wasn't sort of active in the way it was in Spain and Portugal. And in 1632, a Spanish Inquisition emissary was arrested. The New Christians had him framed as a Spanish spy. Later, though, he was released, and 70 New Christians were extradited to Spain. So what this shows is whilst this community were there, they weren't secure, perhaps in the way that communities in, for example, Amsterdam were. In 1656, Louis XIV, the Sun King, officially allowed Portuguese merchants, as they were called, to settle in France. But this was a right that had to be renewed annually. So, of course, again, they didn't have that permanence. And students of history will remember from school, 1685 was the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. And what that was is the Edict of Nantes had had brought an end to the French wars of religion by allowing the Protestants certain rights. And in 1685, Louis XIV withdrew those, which obviously has implications for other groups, including, of course, the Portuguese merchants. And it's not until 1723 that there was official recognition of Jews in Bordeaux. And the translation is that the Jews are the said generalities known and established in our kingdom under the title of Portuguese, otherwise New Christians. And that's to say that the French kind of knew who this community were, but they were useful to them. So we're going to look at a number of small communities first, and then the big communities, and Ton will look at the Jewish records there. I just want to highlight my largely forgotten site, sephardicgenealogy.com, because a lot of the sources that I'm going to discuss can be found on that page. So to start with, Saint Jean de Luz, which is this town more or less on the Spanish border. New Christians were reported there in 1612, but a lady called Catarina Fernandez was burnt alive by the mob there 7 years later. Allegedly, she had harmed the host, the communion wafer, which is the bread that Christians take as part of the communion service, and the Eucharist, and Catholics believe literally turns into the body of Jesus, and therefore some of a superstitious persuasion used to think that the Jews could steal it, and if they poked a pin into it, the wafer would bleed and so forth. And also a Portuguese origin priest was accused of being Jewish, and fairly reasonably the New Christian community escaped to Biarritz, which is just south of Bayonne. The towns of Bidache, or villages of Bidache and La Bastille-Clairance, are interesting and certainly deserving of further study. These were the personal property of the Duke of Gramont. They were not part of France. And so under his authority, people could live there as public Jews, and did so as early as 1600. And I recall Cardinal Richelieu having some not very pleasant things to say about the Jews of Bidache. I don't know the degree to which these have been studied. There are two surviving cemeteries. On the right, we see the restored Jewish cemetery at Bidache, and we can see there's not a vast community, but a decent-sized community must have been there at some point. And in one of his books, Gérard Nahon talks about the cemetery at La Bastille-Clairance, and mentions that there are burials there of Da Costas, Henriquez Lopez, Nunez, Da Paz, and Alvarez. And hopefully in time we can start to mesh together all the records from all the different places and try to work out who was who. Another village in the region, I think it's pronounced Pedro Jorade. I assume that's a Basque name. This is the French part of the Basque country, which was part of the historic kingdom of Navarre. And of all places in Mexico in the mid-1600s, Fernando de Medina, and I think his brother, who appeared in front of the Inquisition there, stated that they were born in this village. And I also seem to remember that there was an Abraham Navarro who appeared at one of my family weddings in Amsterdam, who came from there. These small villages are in we're looking at the communities were there in the 17th century. My non-expert supposition is that when these communities were first established, their focus was trading in products, perhaps contraband, and perhaps also moving people backwards and forwards across the Spanish border. Later, when the Portuguese nation became something different, a more commercial community, I suspect that there was a greater concentration in places like Bordeaux and Bayonne, and their focus was the global market rather than the Iberian Peninsula. But that is speculation. So Dax is another one of these small places where we hear about 10 Jewish families, Portuguese families, I beg your pardon, living in 1633 and got kicked out in 1684, including the Fernandez, the Villarreal, and Flores. So Tatas people probably have heard of. Isaac de Castro was a Jewish martyr. He was arrested in Brazil by the Inquisition, taken back to Lisbon. He refused to recant his Judaism and was burnt alive. And with his dying breath, whilst the flames sort of licked up around him, he shouted out the Shema, the prayer that Jews are supposed to say at the moment of death. And this made such an impression on the watching crowd that this was being repeated around Lisbon apparently for weeks afterwards. And thereafter, when people were being burnt alive, they were muzzled, so they couldn't speak. And Isaac de Castro's brother, David de Castro Tatas, who obviously took his name from the village, has been mentioned in a couple of previous talks, and he was a famous printer who operated in Amsterdam. Toulouse is, of course, not part of this region. It's sort of moving across, let's say, towards the Mediterranean, still in the south. It has a very famous university. The Jews were exterminated, the Jewish community, in 1321, and there was no formal Jewish community re-established until the 19th century. But we know that people went there. So, for example, Balthazar Robio de Castro was born in Braganza in Portugal, was taken to Malaga in Spain as a child. He studied medicine and practiced medicine in Spain. He was a very eminent doctor, later arrested by the Inquisition and tortured, and then left Spain to France, where first of all he taught medicine at the University of Toulouse, and eventually wanting to stop leading some sort of a double life, he moved to Amsterdam, where he was known as Balthazar Robio de Castro. And despite everything he went through, he was one of the people who gave Spinoza a hard time in his turn. So let's briefly look at the two major cities, and Tom will talk more about them later. As we have said, the community of Portuguese merchants were living, for example, in Bordeaux as public Christians, new Christians, until the 1720s. And so if we want to find records of them, we need to look in the records of Catholic Church. And these are held in the Bordeaux Metropolitan Archives, and very hopefully they have mostly been scanned. And Ton and I, when we get to Bayonne, I'll show you some examples. Also, the Mormon Church, so FamilySearch.org, have indexed records from the Gironde, that region, going back to 1696, which is helpful. And as I say, Tom will discuss other sources too. And Bayonne, obviously a smaller town, the community lived were concentrated in a single parish, Saint-Esprit, and mostly prayed at this church. And I think actually Robio de Castro attended this church at some point. And the archives, I'm not sure, yeah. Tom, if you can take over, yes.
Now. French archives are organized according to department. I believe there are 84 departments, and local archives you will find mainly, and those archives departementale. For us, two are important. Archive departementale de Gironde, of which Bordeaux is part. Apart from that, the city of Bordeaux had its own archives. And the other archive that is important to us is the Archive Pyrénées-Atlantique. That's roughly the region that David showed in one of his maps. A closer look up at the surroundings of Bayonne. David. The archives of France have been digitized for the largest part. I don't know precisely how they did it. I think they had microfilms made by the Mormons and turned them into digital images, for the quality is not always very good. An overview you can find on Sephardic genealogy. Next. As I said, the city of Bordeaux has its own archives. This is its main portal, and it has a direct link to genealogy, as we can see on the next slide. It's in the middle, at the bottom. If you go there, you have three possibilities. État civil, that's the registry of birth, marriage, death, and before that, the registry of baptisms, circumcisions, marriages, and burials. And then there are overviews of the whole population at one time. Those are the census, recensement de la population, and the last one concerns burials. Next. If you go to the État civil, that was the image on upper left on the last slide, you get a choice. You can either search by community, for example, Bordeaux or places surrounding Bordeaux, or you can search for the parish or religion. Good. If you type in Israelite in there, then you get this result to the left. Various overviews of registrations concerning Jews, circumcisions, marriage, burials. Next. If you search for Bordeaux, you get to see a table with parishes. And like David said, if there in the period that there were no Jewish registrations, you need to look at Catholic burial, birth, baptism, and marriage records. Bordeaux has some 6 parishes, and what you need to do is, well, you have to go through them year by year, date by date, and look for people with Spanish names or Portuguese names. For those are mostly, but not always, new Christians. Next. This is an example of a birth registration of the Israelite community of Bordeaux. It shows surname first, then given name, the date, etc., etc. And as you can see, this is an index on an alphabetical index on given on surname. Next. These are the communities surrounding Bordeaux and Bordeaux itself. For Bordeaux was a big city and had a periphery, a number of smaller towns and places surrounding it. And you need to look for Bordeaux here. And you have to fill it in the first box upper right. Next. Another department that's important to us is the Archive Départementale Gironde. And this one had technical problems when I tried to consult it earlier on and later today. So I can't tell you much about it, but the notarial archives of Bordeaux are not in the city archives themselves, but in the departmental archives of the Gironde. I will show you how it works with another example, the Archive Départementale Pyrénées-Atlantique, which is on the next slide. I apologize for the poor quality of these slides because these websites have large pages of white and the lettering is very small. So I enlarged what I found here about Saint-Esprit in the next slide. You can see here the registers that have been preserved of the community in Saint-Esprit. There are, well, it's called baptisms, but to the right it's explained that these are really déclaration de circoncisions, so these are circumcisions, and they are there for a few years. Next, we have birth, marriage, and death, and after that also burials. And the last two are for Catholic parishes. Next slide. So this is an example of a register of circumcisions, and you can see that it is really an index organized on last name, then the given name is mentioned, and then the date. Next slide.
Sorry, this is a baptismal record.
Oh, sorry. But you can see that there are some Portuguese names in here. And there's a referral to the date, and then you can look them up in the parish records. And the name here is Almeida. Next one. These French archives are difficult to research. They're not always indexes. Sometimes you have to go through them by date by date, year by year. But they are worth researching. There are also sources from elsewhere, and I can only give a few of them. From Amsterdam, marriage bans, Dotar estates, notarial archives, and from London, I give a few examples of correspondence and of a copy of the Minute Book of Bordeaux. Next. The marriage bans of Amsterdam give the names of groom and bride, the witnesses, but they also give the name, the place of origin. And in this case, you see a few people who originated from Bayonne. It's not always that they were born there, but they had at least lived there for a time. After the origin, it says witness of the groom, and these names are also interesting because there must be a connection, in this case, to Bayonne. There are also a lot of people from Bordeaux and from other places in the southwest of France. So the marriage bans of Amsterdam give you a clue to the family names you will find in Bordeaux, in Bayonne, and elsewhere. I mentioned estates, and there are a lot of dossiers about estates in the Amsterdam archives. And what they sometimes have is ready-made genealogies. This one was made in the year 1795, but it concerns an estate that began with a last will of David Israel Bernal, and he made his last will in 1705 on Curaçao. But he had family in Bayonne, among them the daughter of his brother, Isaac Bernal, is the brother of David, and his daughter is Ribka Bernal, and she was married to Isaac Rodriguez Cardozo in Bayonne. After her, I mentioned her children and even grandchildren. And at the bottom you see Rafael Yeserin Cardozo, who lived in 1795, descended from people in Bayonne, who had a stake in the estate left by David Israel Bernal. So these estates could last for nearly 100 years before they were finally resolved. And there are more estates in which people from France are mentioned, and you might find these beautiful family trees in them. Next. Another archive that's worth looking at is Dotar in Amsterdam. It doled out dowries for brides-to-be. They could apply for a dowry. Not all of them got it. There was a lottery, and some of them could win a dowry. Each year there was a list of candidates, and you see no less than 7 brides-to-be from Bordeaux, who are mentioned in the year 1735. They all applied for a dowry. And some of them even have a great, last one, have a family relation to members of the charity. The members provided the money, and if you are family of a member, you stood to gain more money. There are also 2 brides-to-be from Bayonne in here. And below that there's someone from Marsa, but I think that's Maarsen in Holland and not Marseille in South France. Next. This is from London. It's to be found in the minute books of London. And the back of the minute books you find copiadors, copiadores, and they contained outgoing letters, copy of outgoing letters to communities in the whole known Sephardic world. And you find here letters to Bordeaux. And this one is also about an estate. It signals that in London they are pleased to have received money from the estate of Rachel Fernandez de Vivar, who lived in Bordeaux at the time. The money has arrived safely, and this is a quittance for that. So this also tells you something about people in Bordeaux, but then from outside Bordeaux, in London in this case. Next. And then the Bevis Marks archives have a surprise. They have very good photocopies of the minute books of the Kahal Kados Bordeaux. And they start in 1710 and they end in 1789. Probably someone has ordered these photos to produce a book that contains the printed versions of this minute book. And they are present in the Bevis Marks archives and can be consulted there. And the fun part is that these photocopies of photos are much better than the microfilms that they give you to consult in Bordeaux itself. Because there are microfilms, you don't get to see the original minute book. Next. And this one has, this is a slide that in the haste of the preparation for this talk has ended up at the back. You see here two marriages of Portuguese Jews in Saint-Etienne, Arrive-Labour, and that is a parish in Saint-Esprit where a lot of the Portuguese Jews lived. They pretended to be Catholics, and here you see a marriage first of Fernando Lopez and Violenta Rodriguez. And the other marriage is between Diego Rodriguez Cardozo and Juliana Henriquez. Witnesses are mentioned. They are also probably Portuguese Jews. Next. Some literature. There's a book named Le Lion et le Moucheron. It's by Jacques Blamont. It's still available for purchase online. And it has, it tells the story of Roque de Lion, a Portuguese Jewish merchant living in Toulouse, but ending up in Amsterdam. And it has well, a lot of information about the following families: Enriquez de Medina, Lamego, Lopez de Paz, Robio de Castro, Saraiva, Silva Gomez, and Mendes da Costa. Next. David mentioned Gerard Nahon. He is here to the left. He wrote a lot of articles and books about southwest of France, but also about Sephardim in general. And one of his best-known books is Juif et Judaïsme à Bordeaux, which covers the whole of the Sephardic history in Bordeaux. It's still available for purchase online. It has a good index, so if you want to study Bordeaux, you will be wise to consult this book. And the next book is Juif de Bayonne, Histoire de Juif de Bayonne, and it's available online. There's a link mentioned here, and it's a big fat book of 450 pages. There's a lot of information about the Portuguese Jews of Bayonne, and there's one chapter in particular that tells a little bit more in detail about the families, the important Jewish families of Bayonne. Next. And here we come to the end of our presentation. David, it's time for questions and hopefully some answers.
I think it's worth adding that the French Prime Minister Pierre Mendès France was a descendant of these communities, and obviously they were devastated during the Second World War, but and survive now as or in Bordeaux as a sort of shadow of its former self. But,
any questions in chat?
Stunned everyone to silence.
David Simon asks, many Portuguese Jews in Jamaica claim to come from Bayonne. Did you believe they came directly there or through another port? Actually, I don't know the answer to that. I think they went directly. I know for sure that the Lindell family, which was from Bordeaux and not Bayonne, went directly from Bordeaux to Jamaica, and I suppose the others will have done so.
I mean, possibly the exclusion of Jews from Martinique is part of this whole process. Perhaps the French merchants trying to stop the Portuguese from muscling in, but that's speculation.
And Stanley Mervis in his book about Jamaica also mentions Bayonne a lot. And there's a question from, no, a remark from Howard. A young woman from Perorade made a claim against the transnational estate of the Levantine merchant Joseph alias Soares in the 1660s. The estate settlement file in Amsterdam has a number of documents signed by the syndics of the community. This page shows the signature of syndic Aaron Lopez Colacho. And he is related to Chacham Salomon d'Oliveira. And a lot has been written about Salomon d'Oliveira and the family Lopez Colacho by Wilhelmina Pietersen and by Gerard Nahon. The estate of Joseph Soares, you can find as a dossier about the estates, but also in the main registers of the Amsterdam community because he left money from which his poor family members could claim money, dowries actually, for the girls related to Joseph Soares. And I think the young woman from Perelrade also made such a claim to a dowry. Are the Bordeaux archives searchable? Yes, they are. They are online, but I find the website a little bit clumsy and you need time to learn to navigate. Any questions? Bernard has a hand up.
David asks, are there any local genealogists who can help with Bayonne-specific research? If there are, I don't know them. I assume there are, and perhaps the local archives can advise. Doris is asking for a comment on the coats of arms. I'll let Tom. Tom will be more diplomatic, perhaps.
Well, those are legitimate coats of arms, and they are mostly from the 19th century. Everyone can claim a coat of arms. You don't need to be of noble descent to have coat of arms. So having a coat of arms is not proof of being of noble descent. But they are in Holland, it's organized like this. You can claim a coat of arms and you can register it with the Central Bureau of Genealogy. And they look at it, they correct it, they give it the right colors, they provide artists who are able to design such a coat of arms. And once you have registered it, it's yours. I suppose in France it works the same way.
But I think we should add that these Jewish coats of arms are often coincidentally the same as the coats of arms of aristocratic Spanish families to which they are in no way related, or probably in no way related. So yeah. I think in England, somebody who used to do that, to wear a school tie to which they were not entitled, was known as a cad, and perhaps this is caddish behavior. But that's my opinion. And David was asking about did New Christians keep their Jewish customs and beliefs secretly at home while pretending to be Christians? I mean, I think for the most part we can't really know. I just wonder if it's a degree of socialization, you know, if they're participating within a larger Jewish community, if it's just natural to adopt that custom. But I suspect my rabbi would disagree with that interpretation. And Kevin's asking if there were not two communities in the early days, one Catholic, one Jewish. I have to say I don't know, and it depends where, because I saw that the Bordeaux Jewish records precede the date at which the Jewish community was recognized by the French government, or perhaps there was some sort of temporary or some other recognition first. Sorry, Bernard, you've had your hand up if you want to unmute yourself.
Yes, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to both of you for what you trailed as being a non-expert overview but it gave us a lot of very useful information. So thanks for all the work on that. Thanks also to Howard, who's been posting links to archives in the chat. And so one of my questions might be to him, but my question to the two of you is, as far as we know, because I noticed on the Bevis Marks record, it looked like there was at least one, was there a common habit of adopting French surnames in the various areas that you've been talking about? A second question relates to, it's right on the border, whether there has been any work done that you know of about the Jews in the Basque Country. And the third one, and this I think is where Howard might have an answer, you mentioned the annexation of Alsace or Alsace-Lorraine with its Jews. I have a very long-standing Indian friend born in Mexico whose Belgian mother came from a long-standing, what she thought was Catholic family from the Alsace region, and it had the surname Syndic. And she had thought that it was probably something derived from somewhere around the Balkans. But when I started looking into it, it turns out that the Syndics spelt Sindic were the agents of the Spanish crown in various regions of Spain. So a syndic in Catalonia would be the equivalent of a governor general. And apparently quite a few new Christians became syndics. And I wondered whether the syndics in Alsace might have been descended from syndics from Spain, but also whether they were the same syndics or what the syndics were that Howard referred to in his quotes. Thank you. And thanks again for the presentation.
So I can sort of half answer two of those. That obviously in some of the records we've seen, obviously they've given the French versions of given names. I know that there is a family that was Mendoza that later became sort of Francophile, I'm not sure how to describe it, but turned into a French surname, Mendoza. And this was one of the illegitimate sons of Cardinal, the great Cardinal Mendoza, who supported the losing side. There was a short civil war when Charles V was made King of Spain, and he was on the losing side. And he got a chateau in the Loire from the King of France, and that family were called Mendoza. I suspect most families didn't change their names. With respect to the Basque Country, I've got two thoughts in my head which are actually contradictory. First of all, that my understanding is that there were not very many Jews within that area, and very often claims to sort of Catholic purity in families in Spain relate to their ancestry sort of coming down from the hills after to which they had been chased in sort of 711. At the same time, the word Jews expelled from Navarre, obviously after, top of my head, I can't remember the date, but obviously after 1492, which obviously means that there must have been Jews living in Navarre to be expelled from there. So, but beyond that, I don't know. Perhaps Ton or somebody else can give something more enlightened.
Like David, I have the impression that there were not many Jews in Basque country.
And movement from that region to Alsace and whether the syndics or what the syndics were that Howard referred to. I see his note.
This is Howard. I can. It's if I could. The word syndic I was using. You often see that with French historians. It's really like a warden or a parnas of a Jewish community. It's just kind of I guess it's the civil, French civil way of describing one of the leaders of one of the corporate entities in pre-revolutionary France. So when you see syndic, it would be like a parnas or a member of the Mahamad or something like that.
Thanks.
Sure.
Okay, thank you all.
So I'm just looking on comments on YouTube. Somebody mentions that it's interesting that the letter shown had the Gregorian calendar rather than the Jewish one, or could of course have been the Julian calendar rather than the Gregorian calendar. I'm not sure what the date. And yeah, also points out that the coats of arms are the same as the aristocratic Portuguese families of the same name. So I think they're fake family trees, and they can actually be quite misleading. I mean, when I first started looking at my own family tree, I found this coat of arms in is it Richtap in the Netherlands, which suggested that my Jewish family was related to a very big aristocratic family in Spain, which sadly turns out not to be true. Oh yes, he's also reminding us that Navarre joined the Spanish crown in 1512. So maybe Jews were expelled from there. If I remember rightly, Navarre was basically just split, and the French got north of the Pyrenees, and the Spanish got the south. But thank you, Gazillion, for sharing that. Do we have any more comments or questions? Actually, just as an aside, a while back, I was doing some research, and I think in Bordeaux they have records of foreign ships, often English ships, which have been captured by French privateers, and sort of who they belonged to and who was on the ships, and what they had. And you know, sometimes these contain names that we recognize. Ton, is there?
There's one more question in chat from David Simon. Did the new Christians actually keep their Jewish customs and beliefs secretly at home while pretending to be Christian in the community? We don't know very much about that, because if they were kept secretly, they were kept secretly. So it wasn't expressed publicly. But some customs must have been kept, and surely knowledge of Jewish descent will also have been preserved through the generations. Only we don't know how long that memory stretched. After a few centuries of living as Catholics, well, it's possible that people forgot their Jewish descent. But there is discussion about that. And there's a lot of literature about conversos, new Christians, about their habits by scholars. And
And by non-scholars, the whole
and by
Beneancy
non-scholars, yes. And that discussion will continue. It's fascinating, but it's often also confusing.
No, I think that's right. I mean, certainly, taking my own family as an example, I can see people being accused of Judaizing, but no evidence presented to support that. So who knows? There's David asked an interesting question. Any sense of why Portuguese Jews chose Bayonne or Bordeaux over places like Amsterdam and London to emigrate to from Portugal? Was it easier to get there? I'll leave that for Tom, but I'll just make the observation that France by this point had replaced Spain as the sort of the global hegemon. So I mean, France was where the power was, and that could be part of it. And also, of course, it was the closest country to Spain and Portugal. But probably Ton has something more insightful to add.
Well, geography is a factor. It's close to Spain and Portugal, either by sea or over land. And the first place to reach was often Saint-Jean-de-Luz by ship, or Perorade over land. And from there, people traveled on to Bayonne or Bordeaux. Second reason must be trade. These people chose Bayonne or Bordeaux because it was possible from there to keep in touch with family and businessmen in Portugal. And in fact, there was a lot of trade. The advantage for Portuguese Jews was that they knew the market in Portugal and Spain. They knew the right persons, they knew the notaries, and they had family there with whom they could trade. So they kept this trade going on from Bayonne or Bordeaux. But such networks lasted for 2 or 3 generations, and then it petered out. But still, if you lived in Bayonne or Bordeaux and you had a good life, and you were tolerated by the French authorities, protected by lettres patentes, then why not stay in Bayonne or Bordeaux?
Also, of course, France was producing products that the rest of the world wanted, and had a sort of wealthy domestic market who were presumably going to be buying especially luxury products from abroad that perhaps the Portuguese were involved with. Bruce asks, how did the network of trade finance via France help the Sephardim? That, I'm afraid, is outside my knowledge.
The Sephardim were the network, also in finance. So they helped themselves. I think we have reached the end of questions, and no one has raised his hand.
Francis was asking what products. I mean, obviously France, the obvious things that France produces are sort of, wine and lace, but I assume that a lot of sort of French, well, let's not call them industrial products, but finished products were of very high quality and of demand around the world. It's claimed, I don't know if it's true, but that the Portuguese in Bayonne were the people who popularized chocolate in Europe. I know this is being has been jumped upon by the Bayonne tourist board, but I don't know if it's true or not. I mean, it's entirely possible because it had to be popularized from somewhere. Peter asks if indigo. I don't know. I'm afraid. Shall we? Next week is Rosh Hashanah. And we shall be, well, some of us will be in synagogue, and we shall be back the week afterwards. Again, I apologize for last week. I'm afraid I just wasn't up to it. And somebody's asking if I still have time to queue to see the Queen. I don't think I do, because the queue is closing at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. And Ton, would you, yes, I'd like to say sort of Shana Tova, many years, Chag Sameach, muchos años, and other greetings to one and all. And Tom, would you like to close the meeting?
So, Happy New Year to all in a week's time. And this was Sephardic World, brought to you by the Sephardic Genealogical Society. And we bring you weekly lectures on Sephardic genealogy and history. Again, apologies for not keeping up to that standard. Next week we will be off, but the week after that we will return. And as always, a big thank you to our patrons. See you in 2 weeks' time.